I was sitting at a red light outside a Walmart around 1:30 in the morning when a guy knocked on my passenger window. Not hard either. Just two calm taps with his knuckle like he already knew me. I looked over, and the second I saw him, my stomach dropped. It was the same guy I'd seen all week. Same dark green jacket. Same faded baseball cap. He smiled the second our eyes met, like he was relieved to finally catch me alone. Then he pointed at the empty coffee cup in my cup holder and laughed. "Still drinking that garbage," he said. "You always hated gas station coffee." I had never spoken to this man in my life. Before I could say anything, the light turned green behind me and cars started honking. The guy stepped back onto the sidewalk, still smiling at me like we shared some inside joke. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. At the time, I was living in a suburb outside Columbus, Ohio, working accounting for a shipping company. Nothing exciting. I was 27, lived alone in a small apartment complex near the interstate, and most of my life was the same routine every day. Wake up. Commute. Sit in a gray office for 9 hours. Come home. The only reason I even noticed the guy at first was because he kept showing up in places that made no sense. I first saw him at a speedway near my office on a Tuesday morning. Then later that night outside a Walgreens by my apartment. The next day he was standing at a crosswalk downtown while I was grabbing lunch. Every single time, he'd look directly at me and smile like he recognized me. Not creepy exactly. Just familiar. Like running into an old coworker you can't place. I didn't think much of it for the first few days because cities are like that sometimes. You see the same faces around. Especially if people have similar schedules. But the weird part was how comfortable this guy acted around me. One afternoon I was leaving work when I heard somebody yell, "Hey man, how's your mom doing?" I turned and saw him standing across the parking lot holding a coffee cup. Same jacket. Same smile. I just stared at him. My mom had died 3 years earlier. I never talked about it at work. Barely even talked about it with friends. The guy must have noticed the look on my face because he raised his hands like he'd said something awkward. "Right," he muttered. "Sorry. Forget sometimes." Then he walked off toward the street before I could even respond. That was the first time I got genuinely unsettled. That night I barely slept. I kept trying to figure out if maybe I actually knew this guy somehow. Old neighbor. Friend of a friend. Somebody from college. But every time I pictured his face, it felt wrong. Like my brain should recognize him but didn't. The next morning I stopped at a diner before work, and the waitress walked over with my coffee already made. "No cream, extra sugar, right?" she asked. I told her she probably had me confused with somebody else because I'd never been there before. She laughed a little and said, "Very funny." Then she leaned closer and lowered her voice. "You look tired, by the way. Still having those nightmares?" My chest tightened instantly. I hadn't told anybody about the nightmares. Not one person. I paid for the coffee and left without touching it. After that, things started happening almost daily. Small stuff at first. A cashier asking if my shoulder still hurt. A random guy at the gym joking about my terrible taste in movies. None of it made sense because these people were complete strangers. They acted casual about it too, like we'd known each other for years. I started getting paranoid everywhere I went. At work, I caught one of my coworkers staring at me during a meeting with this weird look on her face. Later she stopped by my desk and said, "You seem different lately." I asked her what that meant, and she just shrugged. "I don't know. Less talkative." The thing is, I'd barely spoken to her more than twice before that week. Driving home that night, I realized I was checking every face at stoplights looking for that guy in the green jacket again. The first moment I knew something was seriously wrong happened on a Friday night. I had just gotten home from work and was unlocking my apartment door when my downstairs neighbor stepped outside holding a trash bag. We'd lived in the same building for almost a year and had never exchanged more than a quick nod. But this time he looked right at me and said, "You staying in tonight?" Probably smart after what happened last time. I froze. "What happened last time?" I asked. The guy stopped walking. His face changed immediately, like he realized he screwed up. "Nothing," he said too fast. Then he walked straight to the dumpster without looking back. My hands were actually shaking while I unlocked my door. Once I got inside, I checked every room in the apartment even though I knew nobody was there. Over the next week, I started noticing patterns that made me feel like I was losing my mind. People knew details about me that should have been impossible. At a drive-thru, the girl handing me my order asked if I still played guitar. An Uber driver mentioned a dog I had as a kid. One guy at a gas station laughed and said, "At least you finally quit smoking." I never smoked a day in my life. That was the detail that really got me. Some of the information was accurate. Some of it was completely wrong. It felt like people knew different versions of me. I stopped going out unless I absolutely had to. I even considered seeing a doctor because I started wondering if maybe I was having some kind of breakdown. But then the green jacket guy showed up at my apartment complex again, and everything got worse. It was around 2 a.m. when I heard somebody knocking on my apartment door. Slow knocks. 3 at a time. I checked the peephole and immediately backed away. Green jacket. Baseball cap. He was standing there smiling at the door like he knew I was watching him. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. Then he spoke through the door in this calm voice. "You need to stop pretending you don't remember us." I didn't answer. I couldn't. He waited a few seconds before speaking again. "They're noticing now." That sentence hit me harder than anything else. Not because I understood it, but because of how normal he sounded saying it. Like this was an ongoing conversation we'd already had before. I grabbed my phone to call somebody, but before I could unlock it, the knocking suddenly stopped. I waited maybe 10 seconds before checking the peephole again. He was gone. But somebody else was standing in the hallway. An older woman from the apartment across from mine. She looked confused when she saw me staring through the peephole and mouthed, "Are you okay?" I opened the door just enough to talk to her. Before I could say anything, she frowned at me and said, "You shouldn't have let him back in." Every hair on my arm stood up. I asked her who she was talking about. She looked genuinely confused for a second. Then she said something I still think about constantly. "Your brother." "I don't have a brother. I never had a brother." The woman's expression changed slowly after I said that. Like she suddenly realized she'd made a mistake. Without another word, she turned around and walked back into her apartment. The next morning, I called in sick to work and decided I was leaving town for a few days. I threw clothes into a bag and drove south toward Cincinnati without really planning anything. About an hour into the drive, I stopped at a rest area off the interstate because I honestly felt like I couldn't breathe. While I was washing my face in the restroom, somebody walked in behind me. I looked up into the mirror and felt my entire body lock up. Green jacket. Standing right behind me. He looked exhausted this time. Not smiling anymore. "You really don't remember, do you?" he said quietly. I spun around and yelled at him to stay away from me. The guy just stared at me for a second before saying, that's probably better. Then he walked out of the restroom. I chased after him immediately. He was gone. I ended up staying with a friend for a week after that. I didn't tell him the full story because I knew how insane it sounded. I just said I'd been stressed out from work. Eventually things calmed down a little. People stopped making weird comments. I stopped seeing the guy in the green jacket everywhere. For a while, I convinced myself the whole thing had just spiraled out of control in my head somehow. Stress. Sleep deprivation. Something like that. Then one night, my friend and I were sitting in his living room watching a basketball game when he muted the TV and looked over at me. "Can I ask you something?" he said. I asked what. He hesitated for a second before saying, "Why do you keep talking about a brother when you're asleep?" I didn't answer him because I honestly couldn't. A few months have passed since then, and I still catch myself looking for the green jacket anytime I'm in public. Sometimes I'll notice strangers staring at me a little too long before quickly looking away. Every now and then, somebody says something that gives me that same sick feeling in my stomach again. Little comments that sound accidentally personal. Last week, a cashier at Target handed me my receipt and casually said, "Good to see you doing better." I almost asked her what she meant, but I stopped myself. Because deep down, I think part of me is scared they'll finally tell me. The worst part is that lately, I've started having these quick flashes of memories that don't feel like mine. Cookouts. Road trips. Sitting beside someone whose face I can never fully see. But every single time, they're wearing that green jacket.